their loved ones. Today, the Rules Committee is convening to resume its 63-year history of authorizing our national defense programs. I want to thank Chairman Rogers for his insistence on getting this done and working towards a fair and principled negotiated package that we see before us today. Like any negotiated product, I have my own views over how this bill could be improved, but I certainly sincerely believe that Chairman Rogers delivered on a mission anchored in the core principles of the Republican Conference, reining in a woke Department of Defense, improving service member quality of life, and cutting waste while focusing finite resources towards our military's core mission. In addition, we will also consider two other important bills. The Liberty in Laundry Act redirects the Department of Energy away from pie-in-the-sky conservation standards and back to its core mission. And the Judges Act, bipartisan legislation that addresses the ever-growing caseload in our district court system. I look forward to the discussion surrounding these bills and will now lead to the acting ranking member, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, for any comments.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I want to echo the deep sentiments and thoughts and prayers and just our thoughts. I mean, both of the losses that our members have suffered over the weekend are deeply felt, and especially with the tragedy that the Massey family has endured. And then our Chairman Burgess, we are united in that sense and sharing our condolences with the entire family and with all of their colleagues, because I know a loss of this magnitude will felt deeply by all the colleagues who love and admire both the Chairman and Representative Massey. So then now we're going to turn our attention to the bills before us. And I share with you the admiration for both Chairman Rogers and Vice Chair Smith, who work very hard on getting an NDAA that is bipartisan and that reflects the values and priorities of our military as they fight to keep us safe and that there may be peace in the world, especially as we enter into this season that asks us to think about peace. So I really am appreciative of the fact that this year's NDAA is rooted in improving the quality of life for our service members and their families. The measures like the 14.5% pay raise for junior enlisted service members and a 4.5% pay raise for all other service members are important steps for our nation to make sure that we provide those who serve us with the resources they deserve. Indeed, it is the care for our service members and unity for ensuring military readiness that typically makes the NDAA very bipartisan. That's why I am disappointed that the Republican majority decided to use the NDAA to attack military families with the inclusion of a provision to attack transgender service members and their families, instead of focusing on what's important, like making sure service members have the resources they need to serve honorably. The majority added this distraction. I don't understand why Republicans keep launching us into cultural wars when the NDAA needs to be focused on preventing actual wars. The Republicans' Liberty and Laundry Act attacks energy-efficient washers, despite the fact that efficient appliances can save Americans up to $500 a year. Instead of helping people lower their bills, Republicans are once again siding with their biggest donors instead of working families. This is just another giveaway to the wealthy elites at the expense of everyone else. And then we have the Judges Act. Adding federal judges is essential to ensuring we guarantee justice in America. And there was a bipartisan bargain to do just that. Democrats and Republicans negotiated a good, fair deal to pass this bill before the election, ensuring impartiality in judicial appointments. But then, at the time that this deal was negotiated, we were well before the election, and the next occupant of the Oval Office at the time was unknown. And then, for some reason, And at the 11th hour, the Republican leadership went back on that deal and refused to move it until Donald Trump won. I mean, that's a huge breach of trust. How are we supposed to negotiate unless the other side keeps their promises? Negotiating in good faith means keeping your promises. By breaking their word, Republican leaders have undermined our ability to work together with you in cooperations. You know, Republicans keep showing the American people time and again that they only care about power and partisanship, and that is always disappointing. But I love the fact that we are starting off on a bipartisan bill, and with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you. And without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. And I would like to welcome our first panel, and I appreciate that you were very prompt and even early and ready to go on time. Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith from the Committee on Armed Services. And Chairman Rogers, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chair Fishbach and Ranking Member Fernandez and members of the committee. I want to also thank your staff year in and year out. They're just very helpful in helping us get this bill ready for the floor, and I appreciate that. And I can't overstate how much I appreciate Ranking Member Smith for his friendship and his tremendous help on this bill every year. For the first time in decades, this year's defense bill carries a different short title. It's the Service Member Quality of Life Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act. We did that to underscore the tremendous gains this bill makes toward improving quality of life for our service members and their families. No service member should have to live in squalid conditions, and no military family should have to rely on food stamps to feed their children. But that's exactly what many of our service members are experiencing, especially the junior enlisted. This bill goes a long way to fixing that. It includes a nearly 15% pay raise for the junior enlisted. It expands allowances for housing and food and improves the cost of living calculation. The bill significantly increases funding to improve existing barracks and build new ones. It enables the services to pursue public-private partnerships to provide better unaccompanied housing as well. The bill reduces dangerous health care wait times by waiving referral requirements for specialty care and expanding the number of DoD doctors and nurses with new special recruitment and pay authorities. Finally, the bill helps military spouses gain and retain employment by making it easier for them to transfer professional licenses between states. We need to recruit and retain the best and brightest because the threats our nation faces, especially those from China, are more complex and challenging than at any point in the last 40 years. To deter these threats, the FY25 NDAA reforms acquisition authorities and fosters private sector innovation to speed the fielding of game-changing new technologies that will give the U.S. the advantage in a conflict with China, strengthens our security partnerships with Taiwan and the Pacific allies, fully funds the modernization of our nuclear deterrent, protects U.S. military bases, the defense supply chain, and academic research from Chinese espionage, builds the logistics network in the Pacific the military needs to carry out operations against China, and it includes new investments to retool and revitalize our industrial base. In the face of growing threats from China, it's also critical we restore the military's focus on lethality. The FY25 NDA does so by ending divisive policies that have hurt recruiting, unit cohesion, and military readiness. We all know that deterring these threats will be an expensive endeavor. That's why this NDA is focused on rooting out waste in the DoD. In fact, the bill includes over $30 billion in savings from cutting systems that can't survive a conflict with China and by reining in programs like the F-35, which are not delivering on requirements. This bill before us represents bicameral compromise. Each corner has some wins and some losses, but the totality of the bill deserves support from all members. This bill will help revitalize the defense industrial base. It will build the ready, capable, and lethal fighting force we need to deter China and other adversaries, and it will provide historic improvements to the quality of life of our service members and their families. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Ranking Member Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I thank the Rules Committee for their incredible work. This process that produced this bill and the bill itself, there was so much that was really good about it. And I want to talk a lot about that and then thank all the people who were involved in that. And then there was one significant problem that I will get to at the end. But to begin with, the process, again, I think was incredibly well-led and well-run by Chairman Rogers, starting the House. He's a terrific partner working on these issues. We went through the typical process of having a markup in committee with hundreds, probably at one point or another thousands of different ideas coalescing into a piece of legislation that we then passed off the House floor. The Senate did their thing, and we've worked together to produce that process. And to echo Chairman Rogers' comments, I love the Rules Committee. You guys do an amazing job. There are so many different ideas that are thrown at you. The process of getting the bill off the floor and then this process, you have been terrific partners, and I really appreciate that. I also want to thank our staff on both the HASC and the SASC. I think we're the only committee that has a bipartisan staff, and it really shows in the way we work together and produce an excellent product. Chairman Rogers and I also share what I think are probably the 4 top priorities for what we're trying to accomplish. One is the personnel. Making sure that we can recruit and adequately support the men and women who serve in the military. Number one, we got some production issues in terms of making sure that we have the munitions and equipment that we need in light of the wars that have happened in Ukraine and the Middle East, and in light of the fact that, frankly, we'd fallen behind on having that production capacity, and we've made a significant amount of progress. Also something that Chairman Rogers and I have worked on a lot that also led to the field hearing that we did out in Silicon Valley, getting DOD to adopt new innovative technologies and equipment that is crucial to the warfighter in the modern fighting environment. And lastly, our partners and our allies. Incredible strength. And I think this bill reflects all 4 of those priorities. Most notably, as the chairman mentioned, we go after the quality of life issue. We had a quality of life panel that was formed. Congressman Bacon, Congressman Houlihan led that panel. A number of members served on it, produced an excellent product. I think Mr. Rogers mentioned there were 32 different recommendations. We got 29 of them. 2 of them were already adapted by the military, and 1 we're going to keep working on. So it really reflects a commitment to helping service members, and in particular, enlisted service members. I think we've all heard the complaints about service members who are on food stamps, who cannot adequately provide for themselves. We know how wrong that is, and this bill takes the biggest step that we've taken since I've been on the committee to address that, and all of that is good. Now, there is one problem in the bill. There is a provision that would bar access to health care for minors of service members for very specific care in a way that I think is completely unwarranted and creates major, major problems. And there's 2 reasons why this is problematic, the biggest of which is the policy is simply fundamentally wrong. It goes after treatment for minors suffering from gender dysphoria. Now, this is a fairly controversial subject for all those who don't have to deal with it. Dealing with minors who have gender dysphoria, if you've never experienced it, it's not something that would ordinarily run into your mind. But if you have, or if you've had a family member, it is a very real problem that the medical profession does not have any dispute about that. This isn't being made up. This is something that is very real, number one. And number 2, the treatments that are available for it, including puberty blockers and hormone therapy and also psychiatric help, have proven to be incredibly effective at helping young people, minors, who are dealing with suicidal thoughts, dealing with causes of massive confusion that have led them to have anxiety and depression. These treatments change their lives and in many cases save their lives. And in this bill, we've decided that we are going to bar service members' children from having access to that. The moment, rough guess, there's like 6,000, 7,000 minors of service members who are receiving this treatment. Well, that's 6,000, 7,000 service members who are probably going to have to leave the military just so their children can get the health care that may well save their lives. I know a lot of people struggle to understand the trans community. They exist, and they deserve to be treated like they exist and get the care that they need. There was no reason to have this provision. Now, I know some people feel in many instances these treatments are too often used. I don't know. That may well be the case. I think it'd be perfectly appropriate to ask the medical profession within the military to examine that question. Or what are the best practices here? And I would have been in favor of that. That's not what this bill does. This bill bans treatments that clearly could benefit minors. There's no reason for it to be in the bill, and it is deeply damaging, and we should remove it. And the other piece of this is this was something that was insisted upon by the Speaker's office. We've had great partnerships between Republicans and Democrats, House, Senate, on how to work our way through this. Speaker's office stepped in and said they had to have this because they didn't want to risk alienating certain parts of their caucus. I mean, to deny what could potentially be life-saving health care to children of service members for any political reason is something I don't believe we should do. It is my hope that we will defeat the rule and that we will pull this section out of the bill and we will pass that outstanding piece of legislation that the chairman did such a great job of describing. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to say thank you both for your work. You know, you've come together and come up with a bill that I think makes sense. So with that, I don't have any questions, and so I'll turn to Mr. Neguse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith, thank you both for appearing today, for your testimony, and for your bipartisan effort over many years. I certainly respect the fact that you both put in a lot of effort year after year to try to transcend party lines and find common ground, ultimately putting our national security and the interests, the defense of the United States first. And I think it is a reflection of the 60-year history of the NDAA and our nation's commitment to our armed forces that you both embody. So I'm very grateful for that. I also am grateful, Ranking Member Smith, in particular, your leadership for fighting for our continued investment in the greatest sources of America's national strength, our service members and their families, innovation and technology, of course, domestic industrial-based military readiness, all of which you described. I'm certainly grateful for the work that you have done to ensure that a number of provisions that are important to me and my state of Colorado were included in the legislation. I have just one issue, or actually one issue, number of issues, but one issue that I wanted to raise with both of you today, and that was in relation to the National Guard, which I know you both are well aware and familiar regarding this particular issue. As you both know, Section 514 of the FY25 National Defense Authorization Act would reassign specified Air National Guard units to the U.S. Space Force without the legally required approval from state governors. That proposal breaks more than a century of important precedent of states' rights. Sections 104 of Title 32 and 2038 of Title 10 in the U.S. Code clearly enumerate governors of every state and territory oversee the forces that they command. And Section 514 would upend and open, in my view, a dangerous door for DOD to impede on those century-old prerogatives. During the Armed Services Committee markup, Representative Wilson offered an amendment to address our concerns with these provisions. It was adopted in an en bloc package unanimously, and I appreciate both Chairman and Ranking Member your efforts in that regard. There were a group of about 125 bipartisan members who led a letter earlier this year requesting that language be retained, and all 55 governors from the states and territories have repeatedly called on Congress to remove that provision. The governor of Alabama, the governor of Texas, the governor of Colorado, every governor in the United States has asked that that provision be removed. It's rare to see that kind of bipartisan consensus, and so I just wonder if you both might expound a bit on that particular provision. I intend to offer an amendment, understanding that that perhaps it may not be received as favorably as I would like, but I'm hopeful that it can spark a conversation, because I do think this is a provision that matters to a whole lot of governors in our country. Happy to yield to either the ranking member or the chair.
Yeah, this is a bill that, this product was a result of the two chambers working, tried to deal with this. As you mentioned, the House version was different. But this bill authorizes the incoming administration to move approximately 578 National Guard members who are performing the space mission to the Space Force. Each one of those 578 Guardsmen have the right to choose whether they want to join the active duty Space Force or stay in the Guard. No one is forced to move. On a daily basis, these folks are performing core space force duties under Title 10. As such, they are not available to the governor for emergency response. But finally, and I think most importantly, nothing in this provision prohibits the new administration from establishing a Space National Guard when it comes into office if it chooses to do so. The biggest problem that we heard in our discussions was it's 578 individuals. If we were to create a Space National Guard, we would have had to have an infrastructure of personnel of closer to 1,000 people to support that. It just doesn't work as long as this branch of the military is still so small. I do expect, and the Secretary Kendall's informed the ranking member of me just a couple of months ago, that over the next 5 years, he expects the National Guard to double in size. Maybe when it gets to that size, it could justify the National Guard infrastructure to support a Space Guard. The math doesn't work right now.
Just to clarify. Sorry, just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that explanation. My question is a little bit different. So it's not about the Space National Guard, but it's about the first part of your answer. So the transfer of the individuals that you mentioned. For 100 years, it's been established law that kind of transfer would require even if it's perfunctory, approval of a governor before that's done.
If I could take a stab at that.
Yes,
Sure.
please.
I mean,
Mr. Chairman,
look,
Ranking Member.
and I think Frank Kendall would be the first to tell you that they should have handled this slightly differently in terms of being better, in terms of communicating. Now, I think the reason for that is they looked at it, and I don't know, there's like 700,000 people between the Army and the Air Force Guard. And then you got 570. So we got Army Guard, Air Force Guard, I think it's like 450, 250, pretty big institutions. So what are you going to do with this small group of people who are currently in the Air Force Guard but serving a space component? They're no longer part of the Air Force. They're now going to be part of the Space Force. What do you do with them? Do you set up an entire separate apparatus for a Space National Guard for 578 people who are in, I think, 8 states, maybe, something like that? 7, 8? No. I mean, the logical thing to do is to phase this out and move forward, okay? And there's really no other reasonable option. Now, the fatal error of not communicating with the governors and working through that, and everyone got sort of whipped into a frenzy about this, and the proposed solution that came back to us was to form a Space National Guard. That's not going to work. I think this committee, I know Mr. Rogers and I, we honor the governors, and no one is going to start pulling 10,000 people out of the Guard without the governors knowing about it. But 570 people really doesn't make sense to do it any differently than the way that the Air Force is doing it. Now, I would urge the Air Force to go talk to the governors, communicate with them better, but it's something that we just have to move past at this point, and I don't think it will have the precedent-setting effect that you described, precisely because, I mean, my gosh, if they can whip up this much of a frenzy over 570 people, God help us if we go for a bigger number than that. But I think this is the right place to be on this particular issue at this point.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And not to belabor the point, any clarity as to what, because clearly the House felt passionately about this. Is there some clarity as to why the Senate was so insistent on essentially removing Joe Wilson's language?
Exactly what the ranking member just described.
That the Senate was sympathetic to the Air Force's arguments.
Yeah, well, I mean, because the logic of it is we tie ourselves in knots, you know, figuring out what to do with 570 people and delaying the decision, and are we going to put in a guard, or we can just do the perfectly logical thing that we're doing and get on with it, I think was sort of the conclusion of the Senate.
I yield back. Thank you both.
Thank you. And I would yield to Mr. Roy for questions.
I thank the chair. Appreciate the gentleman for being here today in front of the Rules Committee. Before I start, I do want to offer my heartfelt condolences to the chairman. We had such a great celebration of Chairman Burgess and his commitment. Obviously, fellow Texan, one of the more outstanding human beings that we're able to work with, and obviously we're praying for his family. And his social media post channeling his faith, I think speaks volumes of his strength of character, and so we're certainly thinking about him today and his whole family. Secondly, I will address first what the gentleman from Colorado was just inquiring about. and we'll see what happens here on the process here with amendments and whether the gentleman from Colorado offers one or not. I am certainly highly sympathetic to his concern. I know it's a concern to the governor of Texas. I know it's a concern to a number of state governors. And certainly I think while a understandably small number relative to the overall guard, in terms of precedent, in terms of where we're headed, it certainly raises concerns. And I think should be addressed before we deal with the next National Defense Authorization Act, whatever the disposition ultimately ends up being today and going forward and as we move forward through the appropriation cycle. But I would just say I would generally speaking agree, as I'm kind of catching up on the issue, frankly, with that concern and want to make sure we address it between now and the next NDAA if it's not addressed now. Broadly speaking, I think, like last year's NDAA, I think for me there's some good and there's some bad. That is the nature of course, the process, that we're not all going to be thrilled with every aspect of a piece of legislation. I'm glad that the overall funding contemplated in the NDAA is within the FRA caps. I know that there's a ongoing discussion and debate, importantly, in the defense community and here on the Hill about our need to have additional funding for additional resources that are needed to deal with modernization. I certainly think that's an important conversation to have as we head into reconciliation and the remainder of the 25 appropriation cycle and the next NDAA. And I support that. I say as a fiscal conservative, having that conversation and that debate about what we need to do and finding the right way to modernize and make sure our military is without question the best in the world and able to defend the United States. That being said, all in the context of figuring out how to deal with our deficits and debt situation. So I certainly appreciate that this bill stays within the FRA and that it addresses some of the issues that I recognize the ranking member raised as a concern. I believe was frankly on the short side of what we ought to do. I supported the House amendment on dealing with getting defense and getting our federal government out of the business of the issues of sex surgeries and the issues related to what the ranking member referred to as gender dysphoria. I've had significant conversations with a number of folks on this in the House Judiciary Committee, Chloe Cole and others who've come in and testified about the horrors of what have been done to them. And I think this was at least a step in the right direction. And frankly, to be clear, I think these questions need to be pulled out of the debate of defense so we can get back to the business of defending the United States of America without having to deal with social engineering debates. I think we need to get back to the focus and make sure that we can defend this country. And so I appreciate that. I think this bill is a step in that direction. And certainly for that reason, I support the rule while still raising some concerns about the substance on the floor. But I think that the rule should move forward for the reasons that I just discussed. And with that, I will yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. I would yield to Ms. Ledger-Fernandez.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. Ranking Member, when you talked about the issues with regards to the insertion of the provision regarding health care for children that was insisted upon by the Speaker, in some senses, is that, I think, I love the way you put it because you put it in the context that the United States has health care that it provides for its service members and their families. And that in this instance, by depriving the families of their ability to make decisions about their health care for their children, we are asking a service member to choose between serving his country, which clearly he loves or she loves, if she was willing to enlist and give their time and subject their family to the moves and all of the hardships. So between serving your country and caring for your child, is that one way of looking at this issue, Ranking Member?
Yeah, and I guess, I would agree with Representative Roy that, we should get back to the business of focusing on the military and not focusing on the cultural conflicts. And yet, here it is in this bill, focusing on the cultural conflicts with the United States Congress, a group of legislators. I know some of us are doctors, most of us aren't. Basically inserting ourselves in a medical debate to politicize a broader issue. And as I said in my opening remarks, look, there's a lot of medical mistakes that get made out there. I've got 2 hip replacements that I'm not sure I needed. Nobody's talking about banning hip replacement surgery, okay? And there's an endless array of treatments that are given to various patients. And part of that is because it's tough to be a doctor. I mean, knowing what the exact right treatment for somebody is not altogether that easy. But what is absolutely incontrovertible and clear is that there are children in this country who have benefited from treatment for gender dysphoria. And this bill says, nope, we know better. Even if you benefited from it, you're not going to get it. Now, charitably, you can say that the reason for that is because, well, they're concerned that some other people will be harmed by that treatment. It'll be the wrong treatment. You listen to some of the rhetoric, it really sounds like it's because there's a lot of people who seem unaware that trans people actually exist. Every day now on the second floor of the Rayburn office, I get to walk by a sign out front of a member's office expressing that rather, in my view, ignorant opinion that is a definite threat to people who are in fact trans, but the legislative body saying, we don't think you exist. Okay, it's a problem. Now again, being charitable, if we want to say, I think it's being used too much. I think it is being harmful to children in some instances. Well, let's, ask the medical profession to re-examine it. Great Britain did that. They put out a study. It's controversial, but they examined it from a medical standpoint. It's not what we're doing here. We as members of Congress are deciding, nope, never. We know nobody gets that treatment. And then to your point, it does then put the service member in a terrible position. If they have a child who is experiencing gender dysphoria, they know if they stay in the military, it will not be treated. And I think that's a problem.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member. And I think it's once again showing that Congress is willing to insert itself into medical decisions, where it should leave the medical decisions by those who are best in the position to make them. And in this case, parents who may be trying to save the life of their child, because I think that the issue of suicide among trans children is very real. And thank you very much. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I would yield to Mr. Langworthy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just want to echo the thoughts of my colleague, Mr. Roy from Texas. Thoughts and prayers go out to Chairman Burgess and his family, and also to the family of Thomas Massey with the tragedies that they've all experienced. I want to thank the chair and the ranking member for their steadfast work as they do each and every year on the NDAA. It's a massive undertaking, a whole year in the making. I have no questions at this time, but just want to show my gratitude for all the efforts that go into putting this massive bill together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I yield to Mr. Scott for any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I as well want Dr. Burgess and his family to know that our heart goes out to them. And I want to thank both of the gentlemen. I serve on the committee. I think you both do an exceptionally good job. And as you both know, the world changes fast. Just look what's happened in Syria in the last couple of days, and it's a very dangerous world right now, and it's somewhat a kaleidoscope in that every time one piece changes, a whole lot of other pieces changes. So I commend the two of you for doing a good job of working together. I don't have any questions. I did want to read this one thing, Madam Speaker, since there's been a lot of discussion on it. The language in the bill reads, the medical intervention for the treatment of gender dysphoria that could result in sterilization may not be provided to a child under the age of 18. But with that, Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. And with that, thank you for appearing before us today, and you are both excused.